Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. So welcome to another episode of Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. And in this episode, we're going to be continuing on our custom rifle building series, in which we're going to be talking about stocks, the difference between stocks and chassis, and why you might want to choose one for your next hunting rifle. We also want to talk about BDC reticles. We take a lot of clients to the range and fit and zero and chronograph all of these different rifles that clients will bring here to our school, as well as when they build a rifle with us, some of the optics that they'll bring. And I want to share with you my honest opinions and thoughts on, why you should and why you shouldn't choose a BDC reticle. So it ought to be a great podcast. Without further ado, here we go. So before we get started, I do want to say a quick thank you to TriggerTech. TriggerTech is the maker of fine rifle triggers. They're put in and recommended for all of our rifles here that we offer for sale. And when customers order a Wolf Precision rifle, they order it. All of our rifles come without triggers. And we'll talk about that in a future podcast as why that's so important, talking about the component-based rifle and what we're saving the customers when they do that. But when they purchase a rifle from us, we always recommend TriggerTech, and that's because they're safe, they're easy to install, and easy to adjust. And I can't think of any three reasons that would be more important to either us or to our customers. So if you want to upgrade your rifle, a great way to do it is with a trigger, and you can learn more about TriggerTech by stopping over to triggertech.com. That's triggertech.com today. We would also like to thank Krieger Barrels. Krieger is the maker of fine cut rifle barrels. They're made in the great state of Wisconsin. They are a family-owned and operated business, and they offer a new program called Krieger Direct, where you can log on and order your barrel and have it in as little as 2 to 3 business days. Great program. It's a way to fast track your rifle build. And so if you want the best and you need it now, you can stop over to KriegerBarrels.com. That's KriegerBarrels.com today. So when we start continuing on our series here, when we're talking about custom rifles, one of the most common conversations that we'll have, not in just building the rifle and why you should choose a carbon barrel over stainless, or why you should choose this length of barrel over that, or this cartridge over that. One of the things that I think is not spoken about as much as it should, and the pros and cons of using different types of stocks and materials, and some becoming chassis and some becoming rifle stocks. And I want to talk a little bit about what my opinion would be the difference between the two, and why in hunting you may want to consider looking at stocks and some of the benefits that they have. We deal with a lot of customers that are going on hunts. Most hunts are in the wintertime, and the northern part of our country gets cold. And you start going out there in February when it's 10 below zero with the wind chill factor, and you're hanging onto a chassis. Well, unless you have really thick gloves or thick skin, that gets painful in a hurry. So these chassis will suck the heat right out of you. When you're looking at a hunting, and when you're looking at building a hunting rifle, you have a choice between a stock and a chassis. And I want to take a few minutes and talk about the difference between the two. A rifle stock, in my mind, would be something that's made out of a dead material. So think, for example, of a laminate stock, something like a Boyd's. Think of something along the lines of a Macmillan stock, molded fiberglass, a dead fill that goes into the center of the fiberglass shell to fill the stock and to make it and give it its rigidity and form. And I don't say dead because it, a live or a dead material. I'm talking about a material that has no expansion factors or conduction of hot and cold. And that, in my mind, is what separates chassis from stocks. So, for example, if you take a Macmillan stock and you take a molded fiberglass or molded carbon fiber, there are several benefits to choosing this for a hunting rifle over a chassis. Now, keep in mind, I'm a big chassis fan, but this is a conversation we had yesterday with a customer. This is a conversation we had the day before yesterday with a customer. This is a conversation we had last week. This is all the time. And for us in the Northeast, they're hunters when the first thing that they say when they start talking about chassis is like, man, I love the look of it, but putting your face on there or holding on to that forearm when it's so cold outside just sucks the heat right out of your hands. And they get it, they know. But I think a lot of first-time buyers, especially when they're looking at custom rifles, they don't quite get the difference other than they think one is more futuristic than the other. So they think of a stock like a Macmillan or a Boyd's laminate stock that is just old school. It is not, and it actually has a huge place in our industry. So when you start talking about rifle stocks, to me, one of the first things that I really like to tell and look for when it comes to either explaining this to customers or trying to say, hey, here's why you want to look at these things. And we did talk about the convection and conduction of what chassis do, being made out of the different materials like magnesium and aluminum, how they behave, and the fact that they just suck the heat out of your hands or they're just really hard to hold on to in the cold weather. But the other factor is that when you're walking through the woods or you're banging these things off of something, it's not a metallic sound. It doesn't have a ding or a dong. When you shoot it, it doesn't have that vibratory ring that a chassis can have. So if you take a traditional chassis of almost any kind, when you shoot it, you get this like bum. It's like you feel this like almost harmonics that rings through the chassis. You know, some people that bothers, some people doesn't, but that's because of the material it's made out of. And when you wrap stuff like that off of rocks, when you've got your sling, which has a metal adapter on it for the flush cups, banging off that aluminum chassis or something, slaps and hits it, that's another big consideration to think about when you start talking about chassis versus stocks is they're loud. They're loud to shoot, that harmonics. They're loud in the woods sometimes because of how they bounce and bang off of things. So if you're hunting with a chassis, you almost have to be a little bit more mindful of, how you're handling it and what you're doing with it and the attachments that you put on it so they're not wrapping around and hitting off of things. To go a couple steps further, I think, in the accuracy world is, I think when you go with a traditional stock, I think it's probably more better suited for hunting. And the fact that, A, it's an inert material, which means it's a dead material, which means in extreme swings of heat and cold, it doesn't expand or contract. And aluminum does. And so a lot of people think that, hey, they locked in their chassis and they've got this tension on your action screws, right? Well, as the aluminum heats and expands, it can change this. And not only that, but then the vibrations or the tuning fork type sensation that these chassis have can loosen things up. They can loosen up your scope rings and caps. They can loosen up your bases. They can loosen up your action screws. You go from really hot to really cold. Now your metal is shrinking a little bit. Is it shrinking and allowing maybe that shooting now to start loosening up your action screws? These are things to think about. But for me, when you start talking hunting and you start saying, okay, what's the benefits of a stock? Well, the first benefit of is it's not going to suck the heat out. The second benefit of it's a dead material. So walking through the woods, it's not wrapping and hitting and sounding off. Now, granted, if you're shooting a hollow carbon fiber stock and you're wrapping it off of stuff, yeah, you might get that plasticky tick that you get. But most of the time they're filled with a very dead material that just absorbs that thump, And same thing with your fiberglass stocks, like from Macmillan. Really can't go wrong with the fiberglass stock for that reason, because fiberglass is a dead material. B, it's quiet, right? You don't have that tick, tick, tick. If you take your fingernail and you start flicking it, and it's like a little carbon fiber box, it's like it has a ring to it, right? Where if it's fiberglass, you just get the dud, because it's weaved in different directions and just how fiberglass and the resins and stuff work. So you get that dead material that has no movement in extreme hot and cold. So you don't have any chance of anything moving around on it. You don't have the expansion and contraction of the actual stock itself a little bit. Now, you'll hear the argument that they have aluminum pillars, and a lot of times they have an M5 bottom metal, which is like aluminum as well. We usually bed a lot of these stocks, not always, but bed them. That gives it that additional inert material underneath, where the action is resting inside the chassis on all that fill material. And that'll help. We're only talking about aluminum pillars that are inch tall and maybe half inch in diameter. There's not a lot of material to move there, pushing and pulling on your receiver or between the bottom metal and your receiver. And then when we fill the rest of the contact points with another dead material, like your bedding compounds, then that's sort of like a buffer, I would say. So if you're considering building a custom rifle, how do you choose between the chassis and you end up going with a stock? And we're going to talk about chassis in next week's podcast. But in this one, if I was to give you the pros of choosing a traditional rifle stock, whether it's a Boyd's type laminate woods, which are a little on the heavy side, but extremely strong and durable, whether you go with a Macmillan that is a carbon fiber, fiberglass, and then filled with that dead material to absorb and dampen harmonics when you're shooting it, so it doesn't shrink or expand or contract in extreme hot and cold, so it doesn't sink or pull the heat out of your hand, while you're holding it in really cold environments. In my mind, if you're in the northern part of our country and if you're going to be holding the rifle and hunting in really cold conditions, I would have to give a couple extra, we talk about checking boxes. I would say that the stock side of this, hey, we're going to go pros and cons for each. You're going to see a lot more boxes checked on a traditional stock when it comes to northern hunting compared to a chassis. Now, that said, you got the HNT 26, which has a carbon fiber front end and carbon fiber rear. That helps out a lot. You also have carbon fiber grips and different materials on your grips and your chassis. That helps out a lot too. And then we even thought about taking and talking with XLR and such about making some type of very thin overmold, or think of like a forearm grip that we can attach to both sides that would be of a dead material. Think of like either carbon fiber or something that just won't conduct hot or cold, to give you something to hold on to with your left hand if you're right-handed on the forearm of the stock. That way you're not holding on directly to the aluminum, which is where the really sucky part comes in. So one of my favorite hunting stocks of all time, if I was picking a hunting stock, would be the Macmillan A3. That stock, to me, as well as a lot of our instructors over the years, have all shot and chosen this stock for hunting rifles and some even for their competition rifles over the years. The reason I like the Macmillan A3 so much is it is fully adjustable length of pull and cheek piece. Now, you can opt to not get those options to drop a lot of weight off of it, or get a carbon version of it with a light fill if it's more of a hunting rifle. But I'm a shooter first before I'm a hunter. I just love to shoot. And so for me to build a hunting rifle that's not fun to shoot or doesn't fit properly, it's sort of like buying running shoes that are too tight. Yeah, I want a good looking shoe, but I also want one that I can finish the race and not hobble myself. Where the Macmillan A3 is one of those beautiful stocks that I would say is a true 50-50. What I mean by that is most of your hunting stocks shoot 80% of their shooting is in non-prone position. So think of like offhand slung. And they're sort of made for that. They're made for that field type shooting and not so much precision shooting. Where the Macmillan A3, in my mind, falls into that beautiful category that there is just as comfortable and at home on the ground with a bipod and a rear bag as they are in a sling, as they are in a hunting scenario, as they are with a tripod, as they are shooting off the tree, shooting off your backpack. They are one of the true 50-50 stocks that actually do really well at both. Now, not the best at both. There's much more competition-driven chassis that you can shoot off the ground, and there's much lighter, particularly when you're shooting field shooting and shorter field shooting stocks. But this is one of those ones that it's a couple ounces heavier. It's a little bit wider on the forearm, so it likes to ride on bags or your backpack a little bit better. It's got a really good vertical grip. It has an adjustable length of pull and cheek piece, and you can sit there and run it to 1,000 yards with comfort all day long. So that would be my first choice. And then the other ones would be, I think they're often overlooked, and we're going to reintroduce some of them here, is start looking at some of your laminate stocks. The laminate woods, if they're done properly and they're actually sealed, they are really rugged. They're really forgiving stocks. They are tough. They're going to handle the conditions really well. If they're sealed, they're not going to get moisture in them like a traditional wood stock. Think of like a walnut stock or something like that where moisture can cause issues. And then if you double down on that and you bed it, those laminate woods are so strong that when you put the bedding compound on top of it, it's like anchoring it in concrete. I mean, it's just the rifle doesn't go anywhere, and your bedding compound is almost a dead material as well. And so it just doubles down. So I'm going to try over the next couple months to start looking at some of the other laminate stocks. There used to be some really beautiful laminate stocks that were made over the years. One was by the gentleman that did a lot of varmint hunting videos. It was Richard's Custom Rifles, and Virginia. And now he has since retired. Another company had bought him out. And it's not Richard Jones. It's another Richard. He is not British. But he made these beautiful exotic wood laminate stocks. It had all these like strange and exotic places that the woods came from. And they were like works of art. They were beautiful. And to have something like that along the lines of a hunting rifle not only gives the rifle some pizzazz, but it also gives it a good talking point. It looks different from everything else you see out there. And they're actually functional. They are legitimately great hunting stocks, varmint hunting, big game hunting, so on and so forth. So we'll try to do some research and maybe post up some pictures of some stock options. We'll try to post up some pictures and do some research, and maybe you'll see some new stocks coming online, gearing more towards hunting than your traditional chassis that you see out there. And next week, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go into why we would choose a chassis for hunting rifle. Then we're going to talk about chassis for tactical rifles. That's a totally another subject. So we're going to dive into that more next week. Now, I do want to this is fresh on my mind because I just got back from the range yesterday with a great client. He came in and built a rifle with us. We really appreciate it. But he brought a rifle scope in that had a BDC turret setup that was for him to sort of dope it out, mark all these numbers down, send it in, let them engrave your cap to 100, 200, 300 yards, whatever it is, and then you put it on your gun, and that's all you ever have to think about. And what I found yesterday, besides it just being a nightmare, because these things are all different on how they want you to get all the information, but just trying to convey to the customers out there and to listeners that, look, the one thing I hate about BDC reticles, and I don't mean to use that word lightly, is that they sell the BDC reticle as a quick fix or less complicated system to shoot long range. And it's sort of sold as like, hey, we don't want you to use your brain at all. We want you to just let us put the numbers on here and do what we tell you to do. And in theory, it sounds great, but I will tell you as a friend that the only thing that separates you from finishing the learning curve is pulling those curtains back and looking actually what's behind the curtain. Like, I think it's amazing when you take shooters like from the shooting school here. The last class had a lot of new shooters in it. And you just open those curtains up and you show them that, hey, this isn't anything complicated at all. And it's like halfway through the class, it's like they've been doing it their whole lives, calculating dope and actually dialing their dope on the scope in minutes or mils rather than making this third-party interface where they want you to get the dope, they want you to send it to them, they want to put the dope on your scope in yards using minutes or mils, but only showing you the yards. And so it's like this complicated interface that makes it more complicated than it has to be with problems. So if you just learn minutes and mils and you get your dope printed out in minutes and mils, the only thing you have to do is turn in what it says. Turn in, if it's 300 yards, it's 1 mil radian, 1.1 mils. Dial it up. If it's in minutes, it's 3.75 minutes. If you're shooting 1,000 yards, it's 28.5 minutes or 8.1 mil radian. One of the things that these systems sell you on is that it's simpler and cleaner and you don't have to think. But the problem is they don't want you to look behind the curtains because, A, if you do, you'll be like, what the hell am I doing that for? This is so much easier. Look back here. I can do this myself. It's not rocket science, right? And maybe it is a little bit, but it's not complicated. Now, here's the problem that I have. Number one, their instructions said that if they print this out and give it to you, that you are good plus or minus 2,000 feet. That just is not true at all. If you shoot enough in weather, density, altitude, that number is in reference to the 3 H's, heat, height, and humidity, right? 1,000-foot swing is 2 to 3 tenths at 1,000 yards, and that's in mils. Each tenth is worth 3.6 inches. So we could be talking about 7 to 10 inches off at 1,000 yards with a 1,000-foot swing. That's plus or minus now. So that's now a 20-inch. A 2,000-foot swing could mean the difference between hitting 20 inches high and 20 inches low. And that's at 1,000. And at 700 yards, 7 inches, the 14 inches high or low. And in hunting scenarios, that matters a lot. And I think the misconception is this, and here's, again, I'm not trying to pick something out and point flaws in anybody else's system. If you like to do this stuff, I'm all for it. But I want to point out the dangers to it because this guy was hook, line, and sinker right in the lip. And my heart sort of breaks a little bit because it's misleading a little bit on how accurate they are and how accurate they'll run when you get in the field. So the other problem that they had is they said that just tell them where you're going to be hunting at. What's the altitude? That's a problem because I will guarantee you could be standing at 5,000 feet on the map, and there's probably never a single day that month you're going to be shooting at 5,000 feet. The reason I say that is it doesn't have to do with the altitude on the map. It has to do with your density altitude, or the heat, height, humidity, or the thickness of the air, I guess you would say, or the simulated altitude air thickness that you're shooting at. And so when you hear stuff like that, in my mind, out to 300 or 400 yards or 500 yards, I don't think you're going to miss an animal. I don't think you're going to hit it bad enough with that fluctuation of 2,000 feet plus or minus. When you get past 600, 700 yards, all bets are off. This is where having a good foundation and understanding what weather does to your bullet, what weather does to your dope for your rifle, what weather does to your trajectory or your bullet flight path, understanding how this works. And then when you do that, the lights will come on and you'll be like, oh my gosh, all I have to do is have a baseline and just watch my weather and I can compensate for it. So now when I shoot at 700 yards, I don't have to shoot where it says and wonder if I'm going to be on 10 inches high or 10 inches low. And I will say 10 inches low on some game animals is a miss. And 10 inches high is spining them. How many times have you watched a hunting video where you watched an animal get spined and drop in its tracks? In other words, the shot went really high and hit them right in the spine or at the very tippy top of the shoulder and broke their back and they just fell right to the ground. That's almost a miss. It's very dramatic to watch because you're like, holy cow, killed him right there, dropped him right in his tracks, right? But it's almost a miss. That's how high they were. I will guarantee it, they weren't aiming at the spine at 600 yards or 700 yards. So I just want to warn you, if you get a chance and you start doing research, and a lot of people have good intentions when they're passing things along. Friends never want to hurt friends when they're giving them advice. They're sharing with them their true experiences and what experiences they've had. And so I don't think people lead people astray on purpose. And I'm sure the people that offer the BDC reticles have all the good intentions of really trying to shortcut or help people that don't understand how minutes and mils work. But I think they'll be better served on teaching them how the minutes and mils work rather than teaching a system around it. And so they don't have to learn it. And I find that to be more complicated because the shooters don't understand what all is happening in the background. They're not looking behind the curtain. And when you do, it's like the Wizard of Oz. You're like, oh yeah, there's no magic here. That's just some guy back here, pulling levers, right? And so I often find that I personally think that teaching people how to use minutes and mils rather than a system around it so they don't have to learn it just makes more sense to me. Teach you the minutes, teach you the mils, and then we don't have to worry about coming up with an ingenious way to teach you around it. And so we don't have to shield you from the knowledge. Like, it's not like if we expose you to minutes or mils, you're never going to be the same person again. Well, I take that back. You'll probably never be the same shooter again. But it's not like if you get exposed to this, your brain melts or something like that. If anything, it makes you and helps you understand your bullet flight path better and how weather plays with it and how you can adjust for it. I mean, you become a more educated shooter and you'll become a better shooter in the process because you'll understand the magic behind the curtain. So if I can give you any advice before you consider doing any type of BDC reticle or a BDC turret, make sure, you always get the minute and mil knobs to come with it so you could always change back if you don't like the system. But I challenge you to do some research on understanding minutes and mils and how to apply that to your actual scope in minutes or mils. And you'll find that it's a much shorter and easier path to learn, and you'll become a better and more knowledgeable shooter and probably a better marksman in the end. Before I continue on, I do want to say a quick thanks to MDT. MDT is the maker of fine rifle chassis. They make everything from the new HNT 26 to the J. Allen. The J. Allen is one of my favorites. We just had a customer who had picked up his J. Allen JE 700 build in Connecticut, and it was at the gun store, and he called up as soon as he got the rifle, like literally the rifle left the day before yesterday, and yesterday he's calling, he's like, you won't believe it. He said, everybody in the gun store was like, oh my God, what is that? And they're all playing with it, and they're all handling it, and everybody's first impression was like, oh my God, this is so comfortable. And he took it home, and he's in his basement or whatever, laying out on the gun, and he's like, I've never felt anything like this. He bought it on a recommendation. He wanted something different, very comfortable to shoot, almost resemblance of a stock, but in a chassis form. And he just absolutely flabbergasted. He was so excited that when he got back, and he spent like 20 minutes to me talking on the phone. So, if you're listening, thank you very much for the opportunity to build you the rifle, and I'm so glad that you like that chassis. It is one of my favorites. We should probably do a follow-up review. I'm going to be doing a video tomorrow in which we're going to be taking the J. Allen out a little bit and shooting a little bit. It's a brand new barrel on it. 22 Creed's going to be on the school line. and we're talking about in our online long-range shooting school. So we might do a little YouTube video, throw it up there, just an update, and say, hey, here it is in person, and here we are shooting it. But if you get a chance, MDT is probably one of the largest custom chassis manufacturers right now in North America. They're doing a great job, and they offer a lot of great different makes and models, including the Oryx, which we find to be one of the best entry-level chassis on the market, whether it's match shooting, getting a kit, a 223. I mean, right now I believe our rifle is started right around $2,500 with the Oryx chassis, and that's with a bad action. That's incredible. And a Krieger IBI barrel, right? And so it's a great entry-level chassis that lots of our customers actually shoot and enjoy. So you can stop over and learn more about MDT at mdttac.com. That's mdttac.com. The other thing I want to touch base on here is don't forget we have our online long-range shooting school. In the online long-range shooting school, you can attend our world-class shooting school from the convenience and comfort of your own home. We now have over 16 hours of content video posted. You can learn more about that at Wolf Precision. Love to have you. It's a monthly subscription. You can sign in, take the class, come back and re-sign in at any time. Love to have you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you like the podcast and you like the content and you know somebody that really enjoys this type of shooting, if you share the podcast, we really appreciate that. If you leave us a nice comment. And also, if you want to support the podcast, you can stop over to Wolf Precision or Patreon and look for Wolf Precision, and you can become a Wolfpack member. It's $3 a month. We really appreciate everyone who has done that in support of the show. So if you like the content and you enjoy what we're doing here, if you want to make a donation, it's $3 a month. We certainly appreciate that as well. Some shooting school news updates. We have our shooting school dates for 2024 up and live. They are open for registration. If you are trying to register with a cell phone, we notice that we are having trouble with some people being able to register through their phones. We are working on fixing that now, but you can log on to any PC or Mac and be able to register, no problem. Should have that problem fixed, but we want to let you know that next year, we're only going to be holding 13 classes, 65 students for the entire year. Our classes are small. We only allow 5 students in a class, and that is because I actually teach every single class in person. So if you want to attend our long-range shooting school for 2024, we certainly would love to have you come and join us here in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and you can register and look at all the dates that we have open for 2024 at wolfprecision.net, and you can register online today. If you do sign up before the end of the year, we do offer our early bird special, in which you can take $50 off the class. To everyone who registered, we want to say thank you. So next week's podcast, we're going to be diving into chassis and trying to explain a little bit about what we would use chassis for. Some chassis that I really like for hunting, I think are really coming a long way, as well as some of the new competition chassis that are out there, and some of the pros and cons to them, some things you have to watch for. You know, one of the reasons why we build the rifles the way that we do now, we build rifles without triggers. They're completed rifles. You install your own trigger. It saves you a lot of money in excise tax and other things that we get involved in when we ship a completed rifle. We're trying to get you the best and the most for your money, and there's no sense in passing along all kinds of extra taxes and fees hidden in there just because we install the trigger. But that said, we still sell the completed rifles. We try not to say, hey, we recommend buy the barreled action and go and buy your stock. And the reason that is so important is the rifle stocks and chassis themselves individually are fingerprints, and so is your action, and so is your barrel and all the other components you're going to use. We really like to test and fit everything in here. It's so important to get them to fit properly, to get them to mate properly, to make sure that, hey, we have 2 fingerprints that match. It will cause and can cause, if you're using a chassis, lots of issues if something is wrong. And I will tell you that most people don't know what to look for. I will tell you after, nearly 2 decades of doing this and going over the chassis themselves, that we still find things once in a while to just make your head scratch. And I will guarantee it, if the unknowing purchaser of that chassis picks that chassis up and bolts that rifle together, it's not going to perform the way it was supposed to. And it's going to steal some of the accuracy away from the rifle. And that's where we think it's so important. So when we build custom rifles here, we build them without the triggers, but we actually fit the stocks and we check them. Now, not all of them get bedded. We always leave that up to the customer. And I explained that yesterday. We were talking to a customer who was asking about the bedding, and he was like, I just want you to bed it. And we have no problem doing that. Some chassis like the Oryx, we haven't bedded one yet. They're a really good inlet, really solid. But we do check, and if we find that it needs to be bedded, we'll call you and tell you, hey, I know we talked about the bedding, but I think you should probably do it on this one. And I told a gentleman that we were speaking with yesterday that we don't use bedding and stuff like that as an upgrade. In other words, we don't sell these additional services as a way to pad our pocket or to increase our bottom line. That is not what we do with bedding. I always prefer not to bed if it doesn't need to be done, because you can actually use it for a different barreled action. It's in that same family, like 700 clone. The resale value is held a lot better if you decide to change chassis later on down the line if it's not bedded. And if it is a good fit, I don't know if you'll see that much increase in accuracy with it, unless it's going to be a battle-driven rifle. And if you're just going to beat the daylights out of this thing, then without a doubt, bedding will certainly help keep that all together. But there are a lot of chassis that really do need to get bedded. They have about a number 2 lead pencil width. So if you take a number 2 pencil and you sharpen it, and you see how wide that lead is inside that pencil, that's how much contact you have on the left and right side of your receiver up front, and about 1 inch of the tang in the back. And if you can picture how thin those lines are, that is how much is touching the stock. You have this whole bottom round of your receiver sunken down in this chassis, and it's riding on something less than 20 thousandths wide. And that doesn't help with repeatability. That also allows you, as you're over tightening or tightening the action screws, to compress that part of the aluminum and flatten areas out. And bedding it will make all the difference in the world and make a world-class shooting rifle if it needed to be bedded. If you don't bed it, you're going to have issues. And we like to check this and fit it and make sure that everything's right. There's not something goofy going on before you get the rifle. So we're going to talk about chassis. We're going to talk about bedding and the pros and cons, some different materials that you see people make out of them, and some chassis that we bed a lot and some we never have. They've been that good or that solid in the way that they've been inletted. So it ought to be a great podcast next week, and we're really looking forward to having you. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us here at the show. We really appreciate it. My name is Jamie Dotson. I'm your host, and you are listening to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.